Jake Morrison walked through the massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers and felt the weight of 1,000 alien eyes watching him. The human ambassador had been to this place many times before, but today felt different. Today, the air buzzed, with tension and anger that he could almost taste on his tongue. The chamber was enormous, with curved walls that reached up so high they disappeared into shadows above. Hundreds of alien species sat in floating platforms that moved slowly around the central speaking area where Jake now stood. Each species looked different from the others, but they all shared one thing today. They were all staring at him with unfriendly eyes. High Chancellor Vextar of the Zephyrians rose from his crystal throne that floated 20 feet above the floor. His body was tall and thin like a glass sculpture, and when he spoke his voice rang out like bells made of ice. The sound filled every corner of the huge room and made Jake's teeth ache. "Human Ambassador Morrison," the Chancellor said, and his words dripped with disgust. "Your species has become a problem that we can no longer ignore. In the past year alone, you have broken 17 different treaties about where you can build your colonies. You have ignored our warnings about expanding too fast and taking up too much space in our galaxy." Jake stood perfectly still and kept his face blank while the alien leader spoke. Behind him, his aide, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brooks, held a small device that recorded everything being said. She was a smart young woman with short brown hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Jake had chosen her for this mission because she could think fast and stay calm under pressure. "The Council has decided," Vextar continued, "that humanity must stop all exploration beyond your current borders immediately. You will also shut down all your research into faster-than-light travel and submit to our oversight of your military development. This is not a request. It is a command." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled aliens. Jake could see species he had worked with for years nodding their heads in approval. The hegemony representatives looked especially pleased with themselves. Their leader, Counselor Thren, stood up on his 6 legs and raised his forearms in what Jake knew was a gesture of victory among his people. Furthermore, Thren added in his buzzing, insect-like voice, "All human military ships will be fitted with devices that limit their speed and weapons. Your aggressive expansion threatens the peace we have built in this galaxy over thousands of years. We will not allow one young species to destroy what we have created." Jake felt anger burning in his chest, but he kept it hidden behind a mask of calm professionalism. He had been expecting something like this for months. The reports from Earth had told him that many council species were growing jealous of human progress. In just 200 years since first contact, humans had built colonies on over 50 worlds and developed technology that rivaled species who had been spacefaring for millennia. "You have 7 of your days to give us your answer," Chancellor Vextar declared. "We expect complete compliance with all our demands. If you refuse, then humanity will face consequences that you cannot imagine." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Jake could feel the satisfaction radiating from the aliens around him. They thought they had just solved their human problem, with a few harsh words and some legal documents. They had no idea what they had actually done. Jake looked around the chamber one more time, taking in the faces of species he had once considered friends and allies. The Crystalline Consortium, who had bought human technology for decades, now looked at him like he was something dirty they had stepped in. The Outer Rim Federation, who had asked for human help against pirates just last year, now avoided his gaze entirely. "I understand your position," Jake said finally, and his voice carried clearly through the vast space. "We will take your demands back to Earth and the Colonial Senate for consideration. You will have our answer within the time frame you have specified." Some of the aliens looked surprised by how easily he seemed to accept their ultimatum. Jake saw Chancellor Vextar exchange glances with several other council leaders. They had expected argument or pleading or threats. Instead, they got calm acceptance from the human ambassador. "Very well," Vextar said, and his crystalline voice now carried a note of satisfaction. "We are pleased that humanity has finally learned to listen to wisdom. Perhaps this marks the beginning of a new era of cooperation between your species and the civilized galaxy." Jake bowed slightly in the human gesture of respect, then turned and walked toward the exit. Lisa Brooks fell into step beside him, and together, they left the chamber without another word. Behind them, the aliens began talking excitedly about their victory over the troublesome humans as they walked through the corridors of the council station. Jake kept his expression neutral, even though his mind was racing. Lisa stayed quiet until they reached their private shuttle bay where no alien ears could hear them speak. "Sir," she said quietly. "They really think we're going to just roll over and accept this?" Jake smiled for the first time since entering the council chambers. It was not a pleasant smile. "Lieutenant Commander Brooks," he said, "I want you to send a priority message to Earth immediately. Use encryption code 7 Alpha. Tell them the dice have been thrown and the game has begun." Lisa's eyes widened as she recognized the code phrase. Every human in the military and government knew what those words meant. They had been planning for this day ever since the first council species had started complaining about human expansion. The contingency plans had been drawn up years ago and updated constantly as human technology and capabilities grew. "Should I also contact the colonial governors?" Lisa asked. "Send the full package to everyone on the list." Jake replied, "Every colony, every research station, every ship captain gets the same message. Tell them Protocol 7 is now active and they have their orders." As their shuttle undocked from the council station and began the journey back to human space, Jake looked out at the stars and felt something that might have been pity for the aliens they were leaving behind. The council thought they had just put humanity in its place with their threats and demands. They had no idea they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. In exactly 7 days, Jake would return to this chamber and give the council their answer. But by then, it would already be too late. The wheels were in motion, and nothing would ever be the same again. The galaxy was about to learn why you should never corner a species that had spent its entire existence fighting to survive against impossible odds. Jake Morrison settled back in his seat and began composing his final report as human ambassador to the Galactic Council. Tomorrow he would have a very different job title if everything went according to plan. Captain Ryan Tucker was inspecting the mineral samples his crew had collected from the asteroid field when the priority message arrived. The bridge of his exploration ship Neptune's Dream had been quiet for the past week as they conducted routine surveys near the edge of known space, but now warning lights flashed red across every console. "Captain," his communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Foster, called out, "We're receiving an encrypted transmission on the emergency channel, Priority Alpha classification." Ryan moved quickly to his command chair and activated his personal decryption key. The message that appeared on his screen was short, but it made his blood run cold. 3 simple words followed by a set of coordinates and a timeline. Protocol 7, immediate implementation. No exceptions. Every human who had ever served in the military or worked for the colonial administration knew what Protocol 7 meant. It was the plan they all hoped would never be needed, but had trained for in secret exercises conducted far from alien eyes. The plan to disappear completely from the galaxy in less than 72 hours, Lieutenant Foster, Ryan said, and his voice stayed calm, even though his heart was racing. "Send acknowledgement of message received, then patch me through to all department heads immediately. We have work to do." Within minutes, his senior officers were gathered in the briefing room. Ryan looked at their faces and saw that they already knew something big was happening. The expressions ranged from excitement to fear, but everyone looked ready for whatever was coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ryan began, "as of this moment, Neptune's Dream is no longer an exploration vessel. We are now part of the largest evacuation operation in human history. Every human ship station and settlement in the galaxy has just received the same orders we did. We have 68 hours to complete our assigned tasks and reach the rendezvous." Point Commander Lisa Park. His first officer leaned forward in her chair. She was a tough woman who had served on the frontier for 15 years, and Ryan had never seen her look worried before today. "Sir, what about our research data and the mineral samples? Some of this stuff took us months to collect." "Everything comes with us," Ryan replied. "Every piece of equipment, every data file, every sample gets loaded onto the transport ships. If we cannot take it with us, then we destroy it completely. Nothing of value can be left for the aliens to find. Across the galaxy, the same scene was playing out on thousands of human ships and stations. Dr. Helen Carter stood in her laboratory on Mars and watched her team pack decades of research into transport containers. The Mars Research Institute had been humanity's most advanced facility for studying alien technology and developing new weapons systems. "Are we really leaving all of this behind?" asked Dr. Peter Lewis as he carefully secured a container full of antimatter research notes. He had spent 10 years working on the project, and the idea of abandoning it made him feel sick. "We are not leaving anything behind," Helen replied firmly. "Every piece of equipment, every computer file, every prototype weapon is coming with us. Mars. Base may be empty when the aliens arrive, but they will find nothing useful here." The evacuation was happening so smoothly that it seemed impossible. Entire cities were being packed up and loaded onto massive cargo ships that had been secretly built for this exact purpose. Manufacturing facilities that had taken decades to construct were being dismantled piece by piece and stored in the holds of transport vessels on the military base. Deep Space Platform Omega Commander Alex Parker oversaw the removal of humanity's most classified weapons research. The experimental plasma cannons and shield generators that his team had been developing were too valuable to leave behind and too dangerous to let fall into alien hands. "How much time do we have left?" Parker asked his aide, Sergeant Bill Cooper, as another load of equipment disappeared into a transport ship. 36 hours until the deadline, sir." Cooper replied. "All critical systems have been removed, and the base self-destruct charges are in place. When we leave, this place will be nothing but empty metal and radiation." The most challenging part of the operation was happening on Earth itself. 8 billion humans had to disappear without leaving any trace of where they had gone or how they had managed such an impossible feat. Every city, every town, every farm had to be evacuated while making it look like people had simply vanished. In the middle of their daily activities, Mayor Janet Williams stood in the empty streets of New Chicago and marveled at how quiet the city had become. Just 48 hours ago, these streets had been full of people and vehicles and the sounds of a thriving metropolis. Now there was nothing but wind blowing through abandoned buildings. "The last transport leaves in 2 hours. Her assistant told her, "Are you ready to go?" Janet took one last look at the city she had called home for 60 years. The buildings would remain standing but empty, like a movie set waiting for actors who would never return. "Yes," she said, "let's go home." But home was no longer Earth or any of the worlds that humans had colonized in council space. Home was now a destination that only a few people in the entire galaxy knew about. A place where humanity could start over and build something better than what they were leaving behind. The alien species who lived near human colonies began to notice that something was wrong when the regular supply ships failed to arrive on schedule. Trade stations that had been busy with human merchants for decades suddenly went silent. Communication attempts to human worlds received no response. Captain Nexwill of the Zephyrian Navy was ordered to investigate when the human colony on Kepler 7 stopped responding to Council communications. What he found when his ship arrived made no sense at all. The colony was still there, but it was completely empty. "There are no life signs anywhere on the planet," his science officer reported. "But all the buildings are intact, and there are no signs of violence or disaster. It looks like everyone just walked away and left everything behind." Nexwill ordered landing teams to search the abandoned settlements. What they found was even more puzzling. Houses stood exactly as their owners had left them, with meals half finished, on tables and personal belongings scattered around as if people had simply vanished in the middle of whatever they were doing. "Sir," one of his officers called over the communicator, "you need to see this. We found the industrial district and it has been completely stripped. Every piece of machinery, every computer, every tool has been removed. The buildings are empty shells." Similar reports were coming in from every human world that council ships visited. The colonies appeared to be intact, but they were all completely deserted, and anything of technological value had been removed with surgical precision. Back on the council station, Chancellor Vex Tar received the first reports with growing confusion. The humans were supposed to be considering their ultimatum, not disappearing entirely from the galaxy. He called an emergency session to discuss what was happening. "Perhaps they are trying to frighten us with this display," suggested Counselor Thren. "Humans are known for their dramatic gestures. They will return when they realize we are serious about our demands." But 3 days later, when Ambassador Jake Morrison failed to appear for his scheduled meeting with the Council, the truth began to sink in. The humans had not simply retreated to their home system to consider the Council's demands. They had vanished completely, taking their technology, their ships, and even their people with them. The galaxy suddenly felt much larger and much emptier than it had just a week before. 3 months had passed since the Galactic Council delivered their ultimatum to humanity, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that something unprecedented had occurred. What started as confusion had grown into genuine alarm as the full scope of humanity's disappearance became clear to everyone. Captain Nexwell stood on the bridge of his Zephyrian warship as it approached the Sol system and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature controls. His orders from Chancellor Vextar were simple: find out what happened to the humans and report back immediately. But as his sensors swept the system, he was seeing readings that made no sense, Captain. His science officer called out with barely controlled panic in her voice. I am detecting no artificial energy signatures from Earth, no communications, no power, grids, no spacecraft traffic. The planet appears to be completely dead. Nexwell moved to the sensor station and studied the data himself. Earth hung in space like a blue and green jewel, just as it always had. But there were no signs of the 8 billion humans who had lived there just months before. No radio signals, no heat signatures from cities, no movement of any kind. Take us into orbit, he ordered. Prepare landing teams for surface reconnaissance. I want to know what happened down there. The first shuttle touched down in what had once been New York City, and the landing team found themselves in a place that felt like a tomb. The massive buildings still reached toward the sky and the streets were clear of debris, but there was absolutely no sign of life anywhere. Cars sat abandoned exactly where their drivers had left them, with keys still in the ignition. Lieutenant Keithara led her team through the empty streets and tried to make sense of what she was seeing. It looks like everyone just stopped what they were doing and walked away, she reported back to the ship. But there are no bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of where they went. The team entered apartment buildings and found living spaces that looked like people had just stepped out for a few minutes. Meals sat half-eaten on tables. Television screens showed static. Children's toys lay scattered on floors where they had been dropped, but every human was gone as if they had never existed at all. Sir, another team member called from across the street. I found something strange here. This building appears to be some kind of government facility, but all the computer systems have been wiped clean. There are empty slots where servers and data storage units should be, but everything valuable has been removed. Similar reports came in from teams all over the planet. Every major city, every small town, every rural area showed the same impossible pattern. The humans were gone, but they had taken only the things that mattered. All advanced technology had been removed or destroyed. All computer data had been erased. All weapons and research materials had vanished. Dr. Yithel of the Council Intelligence Division received the reports from Earth and dozens of other human worlds and began to see a pattern that terrified her. This was not a mass evacuation or a retreat to safer territory. This was something that required planning and coordination on a scale that seemed impossible. Council members, she announced to the emergency assembly that had been called to address the human situation, we are dealing with something that has never happened before in galactic history. An entire species has vanished from the galaxy, taking all their technology and leaving no trace of where they went or how they managed it. Chancellor Vexatar shifted uncomfortably on his crystal throne. The smug satisfaction he had felt after delivering the ultimatum to humanity had been replaced by growing unease. Surely they cannot have gone far, he said. There are only so many places in the galaxy where 8 billion humans could hide. But Dr. Yithel had been studying the data for weeks, and her conclusions were disturbing. The logistics of what they accomplished are staggering, she continued. Every human ship, every space station, every colony was evacuated within a matter of days. This level of coordination suggests they had been preparing for this possibility for years, possibly decades. The economic impact of humanity's disappearance was becoming impossible to ignore. Trade routes that had been dominated by human merchant fleets now sat empty. The efficient shipping networks that humans had built to connect different parts of the galaxy had collapsed overnight, leaving many species struggling to get basic supplies. The industrial world of Proxima 7, the Crystalline Consortium, was facing a crisis that threatened their entire civilization. For the past 50 years, they had relied on human technology and expertise to run their manufacturing facilities. Without human technicians and engineers, their production had dropped to less than half of normal levels. Administrator Kexton called an emergency meeting of the consortium leadership as reports came in of critical system failures across their industrial base. "We cannot continue operating without human technical support," he announced. "Our people simply do not understand how their equipment works." The same problem was affecting species across the galaxy. Humans had quietly become essential to countless industries and services over the past 2 centuries. Their disappearance left gaps that other species found impossible to fill quickly. Admiral Kethvar of the Council Defense Force was dealing with an even more serious crisis. Human military contractors and mercenary companies had been handling security operations throughout the galaxy for decades. Without them, pirate activity had exploded, and several long, simmering border disputes had erupted into open warfare. "The Outer Rim is in complete chaos," he reported to the Council. "Human peacekeeping forces were the only thing maintaining stability in those sectors. Without them, we are seeing conflicts that we thought were settled decades ago." The revelation that hit the Council hardest came when Dr. Yithel presented her analysis of human defensive capabilities. For years, the Council had assumed that they understood the limits of human military technology. They had been wrong about everything. "Based on our investigation of abandoned human facilities," she explained, "their actual technological capabilities were far beyond what they had revealed to us. We found evidence of weapons research projects that were decades ahead of anything we possess. Worse still, they took all of it with them when they left." The implications sent a wave of fear through the assembled aliens. Not only had humanity been hiding the true extent of their abilities, but they had also been prepared for exactly this situation. The evacuation had not been a panicked retreat. It had been a carefully planned operation that had been ready to execute at a moment's notice. "Where could they have gone?" Counselor Thren demanded. "We have searched every system within 1,000 light years. There is no trace of them anywhere." Dr. Yithel looked around the chamber at the faces of species who had ruled the galaxy for millennia and saw something she had never seen before: genuine fear. "That," she said quietly, "is what terrifies me most of all. They have vanished so completely that it suggests capabilities we never imagined. We may have made the greatest mistake in galactic history." The chamber fell silent as the truth of her words sank in. The Council had thought they were dealing with an upstart species that needed to be put in its place. Instead, they had forced humanity to reveal just how far ahead they actually were. And now those humans were somewhere out in the darkness planning their next move. Chancellor Vextar stared out at the stars beyond the chamber windows and wondered what humanity was doing in whatever hiding place they had found. For the first time in his long life, he felt truly afraid of the answer. 6 months after humanity vanished from the galaxy, the true scope of the catastrophe was becoming impossible for anyone to ignore. What had started as economic disruption had grown into complete societal collapse for many species who had grown dependent on human innovation and efficiency over the past 2 centuries. Administrator Zextel of the Hegemony Trade Commission stood before a wall of monitors showing red warning indicators from across their territory. Food shortages were spreading through dozens of worlds as the agricultural networks that humans had built and maintained began to fail without proper supervision. "How bad is it?" asked his deputy as she reviewed the latest reports from their farming colonies. "Worse than we thought possible," Zextel replied grimly. "The human agricultural scientists did not just sell us their technology, they redesigned our entire food production system. Without their hybrid crop varieties and their knowledge of soil management, we are looking at famine conditions within the year." The Hegemony had been one of the most vocal supporters of the Council's ultimatum to humanity. Their representatives had stood in the chamber and applauded when Chancellor Vextar delivered his demands. Now their worlds were facing starvation, because they had never bothered to learn how the systems that fed their people actually worked. Similar crises were erupting across the galaxy as species discovered just how integrated humans had become into their daily lives. The Outer Colonies Federation was dealing with complete infrastructure collapse as the maintenance protocols that human engineers had established were failing one by one. Director Nethwil of the Colonial Management Authority watched helplessly as power grids failed and transportation systems broke down across 17 different worlds. We always assumed our people could learn to do what the humans did, she explained to the emergency council meeting. But their solutions were so far ahead of our understanding that we cannot even figure out how to maintain them. The military situation was even worse than the economic collapse. Admiral Keithvar stood in the Council Defense Force Command Center and watched red warning lights indicate active conflicts in more than 30 different sectors. Without human peacekeeping forces and security contractors, the galaxy was descending into chaos, sir. His operations officer reported, "We have confirmed pirate activity in the Kepler sector, the Vega system, and along the entire Outer Rim trade route. Our forces are spread too thin to respond to even half of these incidents." For decades, human mercenary companies had quietly handled most of the galaxy's security problems. They had been efficient, cost-effective, and ruthlessly competent at dealing with threats that other species preferred to avoid. Their absence had created a power vacuum that criminal organizations were rushing to fill. The most alarming development was happening in the border regions, where several old territorial disputes had exploded back into active warfare. The Crystalline Consortium and the Independent Worlds Alliance had been fighting over mining rights in the Rigel sector for over a century, but human mediators had kept the conflict from escalating beyond occasional skirmishes. Now, with no human peacekeepers to maintain the ceasefire, both sides had resumed full-scale military operations. What made it worse was that both species had been buying their most advanced weapons from human manufacturers for the past 50 years. Without replacement parts and technical support, their military effectiveness was dropping rapidly even as they fought each other. Captain Vexenara of the Consortium Defense Fleet found herself commanding ships that were breaking down faster than her repair crews could fix them. "Half our weapon systems are offline," she reported to Fleet Command, "and we cannot manufacture replacement parts because the humans took all the technical specifications with them when they left." But the psychological impact of humanity's disappearance was proving to be even more damaging than the practical consequences. For thousands of years, the various species of the galaxy had viewed humans as newcomers who needed guidance and control from their more experienced neighbors. The realization that humans had been far more advanced and organized than anyone suspected was shattering long-held beliefs about galactic hierarchy. Dr. Ythel had spent months analyzing every piece of data they could find about human activities, and her conclusions were disturbing enough to keep her awake during her sleep cycles. She stood before the Council's emergency session with reports that would change how every species viewed their place in the galaxy. "Council members," she began, "our investigation has revealed that humanity was not simply more advanced than we realized. They were operating on a completely different level from the rest of us. The coordination required for their evacuation suggests planning and organizational capabilities that we are only beginning to understand." Chancellor Vextar leaned forward on his crystal throne as Dr. Ythel displayed holographic charts showing the timeline of human activities leading up to their disappearance. The data painted a picture of a species that had been preparing for exactly this scenario for decades. Every human settlement, every research facility, every military installation was evacuated with perfect timing and coordination. She continued, "This was not a panic response to our ultimatum. It was the execution of a plan that had been refined and updated for years. They knew this day would come and they were ready. The implications were staggering. If humans had been planning for forced evacuation, it meant they had never trusted the Council or believed in the peaceful coexistence that other species took for granted. It meant they had been preparing for war while everyone else believed they were building lasting friendships." Furthermore, Dr. Ythel added, "Our analysis of the technology they left behind suggests that everything we thought we knew about human capabilities was deliberately misleading. They showed us only what they wanted us to see while keeping their true achievements hidden. The evidence was overwhelming. Human ships that the Council had cataloged as civilian transports had been equipped with military-grade shields and weapons that were disguised as navigation and communication equipment. Human research facilities that claimed to be studying agriculture had been developing advanced materials and energy systems that put Council technology to shame. They were never the junior partners we thought they were." Dr. Ythel concluded, "They were the most advanced species in the galaxy, and they let us believe we were in charge while they quietly became essential to our survival. The silence that followed her presentation was broken only by the soft humming of the chamber's environmental systems. Every council member was processing the reality that they had just driven away the one species that had been holding galactic civilization together. Councillor Thren was the first to speak, and his voice carried a tremor that no one had ever heard from him before. If they were that advanced, he asked, why did they never challenge our authority directly? Why did they pretend to accept council oversight? Dr. Yithel looked around the chamber at faces that showed fear, confusion, and growing desperation. I believe, she said slowly, that they were studying us, learning everything they could about how we operated while building the capabilities they would need when the relationship inevitably broke down. We were never their partners or their supervisors. We were their research subjects. The truth hit the assembled aliens like a physical blow. For 2 centuries they had thought they were managing human expansion and development. In reality, humans had been managing them, learning their weaknesses, and preparing for the day when peaceful coexistence would no longer be possible. Admiral Kethvar stood up slowly from his position at the military briefing station. Dr. Yithel, he said, if your analysis is correct, then we face a question that terrifies me. If humans were this advanced when they left, what are they building now that they no longer need to hide their capabilities? The chamber fell silent again, as every species representative contemplated the implications. Somewhere out in the darkness beyond the known galaxy, humanity was free to develop their technology without limitations or oversight. They had taken everything they had built and learned, and they were no longer pretending to be less than they actually were. Chancellor Vextar stared out at the stars and wondered what humanity was planning in whatever sanctuary they had found. The Council's ultimatum had been intended to put humans in their place, but instead, it had freed them from all constraints. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you cornered the most dangerous species in known space. 1 year after humanity had vanished from the galaxy, the long-range sensors at Council Deep Space Station Alpha detected something that should have been impossible. A massive fleet was approaching from beyond the galactic rim, moving at speeds that exceeded anything in the known technology databases. Sensor operator Nexkara stared at her displays with growing disbelief as more and more contacts appeared on her screens. Station Commander, she called out with barely controlled panic in her voice. I am reading over 300 vessels approaching our position. Configuration unknown, but they are definitely not from any Council species. Station Commander Yithvar rushed to the sensor station and felt his blood freeze as he studied the incoming data. The ships were enormous, far larger than anything the Council had ever built, and they were moving in perfect formation with a precision that spoke of military discipline and advanced coordination systems. Send immediate alert to Council Command. He ordered priority Alpha classification. Unknown fleet approaching Council space. Request immediate reinforcement and stand by for possible hostile contact. But even as he gave the orders, Yithvar knew that no Council reinforcements would arrive in time to make a difference. The approaching fleet was less than 6 hours away, and moving at a speed that suggested technology far beyond current galactic standards, on the bridge of the flagship Earth's Resolve. Captain Ben Marshall watched the Council station's frantic communications traffic with grim satisfaction. The aliens were finally beginning to understand that their comfortable galaxy was about to change forever. Admiral Sullivan, he reported to the woman standing beside his command chair. Council forces are mobilizing, but their response time suggests they were not prepared for contact from this direction. We have achieved complete tactical surprise, Admiral Kate Sullivan nodded, as she studied the tactical displays showing Council ship movements throughout the local sector. She was a tall woman, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat to show fear or hesitation. The year of exile had changed her from a defensive-minded officer into someone who understood that sometimes the best way to ensure peace was to demonstrate superior strength. Captain Marshall, she said, open a channel on all Council frequencies. It is time to announce our return. The transmission that went out to every Council world and every military installation carried a simple message that would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. This is Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Human Expeditionary Force. We have returned to reclaim what was ours and to offer liberation to those who desire it. The response from Council Command was immediate and predictable. Chancellor Vextar's voice came across the communication channel with the same arrogant tone he had used when delivering his ultimatum a year before. Unknown vessels, you are in violation of Council space. Identify yourselves and state your intentions, or face the consequences. Admiral Sullivan smiled coldly as she replied. The Chancellor still thought he was dealing with the same humans who had quietly accepted his demands and disappeared into the darkness. He had no idea how much had changed. During their year of exile, Chancellor Vextar, she said, "I think you know exactly who we are. The question you should be asking yourself is whether you are prepared for what we have become." The fleet that surrounded the human flagship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships that combined the best of human engineering with technology, freely shared by dozens of allied species who had grown tired of Council dominance over the past millennium. The humans had not spent their year of exile hiding in some remote corner of space. They had been building alliances and preparing for their return. Dr. Helen Carter stood in the command center of the massive research vessel New Horizons and watched as her teams prepared to deploy technology that would revolutionize galactic warfare. The year away from Council oversight had allowed human scientists to pursue research that had been restricted or forbidden under the old treaties. All weapons. Systems report ready, announced Commander Lisa Park, who had been promoted to lead the fleet's tactical operations. The weapons she was referring to were not the limited defensive systems that humans had been allowed to develop under Council supervision. These were devices that incorporated breakthrough discoveries in energy manipulation and matter conversion that put them centuries ahead of anything in the Council arsenal. The most significant change was not in human technology, but in human alliances. Captain Ryan Tucker commanded a mixed squadron that included ships from the Wanderer clans, the Independent Worlds, and even some former Council species who had quietly contacted humanity during their exile. "Admiral," he reported, "our allied forces are in position throughout the sector. The Wanderer fleet has secured the outer perimeter, while Independent World forces have established control over the major trade routes. Any Council reinforcements will have to fight their way through multiple defensive lines." Admiral Sullivan had spent the past year not just building ships and weapons, but also building relationships with species who shared humanity's frustration with Council control. The result was a coalition that represented nearly half the galaxy's independent worlds and colonial territories. The psychological warfare was proving to be as effective as the technological superiority. Council forces throughout the region were reporting mass defections as individual ship commanders chose to join the human alliance rather than fight against overwhelming odds. "Sir," reported the communications officer on the Council flagship Galactic Pride, "we are receiving surrender offers from 17 different vessels in our own fleet. Ship commanders are saying they will not fire on human forces." Fleet Admiral Thexanol of the Council Defense Force stared at his tactical displays with growing despair. His forces were outnumbered, outgunned, and apparently losing the loyalty of his own officers.
The humans had returned with capabilities that made Council technology look primitive by comparison. "All Council ships," he broadcast on the Fleet Command frequency. "This is Fleet Admiral Thexanol. Any vessel that surrenders to the humans will
be considered guilty of treason against the Council." But his threats fell on deaf ears as more ships switched sides or simply powered down their weapons and refused to engage the human fleet. The year of chaos and suffering that had followed humanity's departure had convinced many species that the Council's leadership had led them into disaster. On Earth, the transformation was even more dramatic than the military buildup in space. Dr. Helen Carter had returned to find her homeworld converted into a massive research and manufacturing center where human and allied scientists worked together on projects that would have been impossible under Council restrictions. The global research complex covered most of what had once been North America, and its laboratories were producing advances in physics, engineering, and biotechnology at a rate that astonished even the researchers themselves. Without the need to hide their capabilities or limit their research to avoid alarming Council oversight, humanity was free to pursue knowledge wherever it led. "The new shield generators are exceeding all projected performance parameters," reported Dr. Peter Lewis as he reviewed the latest test data, "and the power systems we developed with Wanderer technology are producing energy densities that should be theoretically impossible." The year of exile had given humanity something far more valuable: than advanced weapons or defensive systems. It had given them the freedom to think and dream and build without limitations. The result was a technological renaissance that had transformed them from an advanced species into something approaching a galactic superpower. Admiral Sullivan stood on the observation deck of Earth's Resolve and looked out at the fleet that had followed humanity home. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species, all united in their determination to build something better than the Council's corrupt and stagnant civilization. Captain Marshall, she said, transmit our terms to the Council. They can surrender their authority peacefully, or we will take it from them by force. The choice is theirs, but either way the old galaxy is finished. The message that reached Council Command was simple and direct. Humanity was offering to accept the surrender of the Council and establish a new galactic government based on cooperation rather than domination. Species would be free to govern themselves as long as they respected the rights of others and contributed to the common defense chancellor. Fextar read the terms with shaking hands as he realized that his 1,000-year-old civilization was coming to an end. The humans had not returned as refugees begging for readmission to galactic society. They had returned as conquerors offering mercy to those who submitted and promising destruction to those who resisted. Prepare my personal shuttle, he ordered. His aide, I will meet with Admiral Sullivan personally to discuss terms. The galaxy watched as the Zephyrian leader who had driven humanity into exile traveled to the human flagship to negotiate his own surrender. The Council's instant mistake when humanity left in silence had given birth to a new galactic order, where human ingenuity and determination would shape the future of countless worlds as the shuttle docked with Earth's Resolve. Admiral Sullivan knew that the real work was just beginning.